One of the lasting memories of the Second World War is the Allied victory, which came at a huge cost to lives all around the world. In Europe, Germany had been bombed extremely heavily in industrial heartlands and towns to bring its war production industry to its knees. The strategic bombing under the command of Bomber Harris attracted much controversy, and many deemed it to be unnecessary. The reality as the war came to a conclusion in Europe was that huge swathes of the continent had been decimated at the hands of occupying forces, military ordnance, or by the effects of the war. A human cost was also unravelling, with the true crimes of the Nazi regime coming to the forefront, but there was another issue plaguing the Allies in 1945. Following the liberation of France, it looked inevitable that the Germans and the Axis would be defeated. However, the Allies would then move on to other countries, such as Belgium. However, there was a situation developing in the Netherlands which was incredibly desperate. Today we look at the Allied Operation Manna, that helped to save thousands from starvation in Nazi-occupied Holland. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Despite being neutral, on the 10th of May 1940 the Netherlands were invaded by the Germans, and within 5 days the Dutch army had surrendered, with the royal family and government fleeing for their lives. As the war intensified, Germany demanded more and more from its occupied territories to help contribute to the war effort in both financial and manufacture circumstances. The Nazi race laws were even applied to those living in the Netherlands, with Jews and other minorities facing huge amounts of repression. In summer 1944, however, conditions were deteriorating in the Netherlands. The Nazi occupiers were losing the war, and all supplies were heading for the desperate Wehrmacht. The Allies were able to liberate the southern part of the country, but their advance into the Netherlands was halted with the failure of Operation Market Garden and the attempts to seize the bridges across the Rhine at Arnhem. A German blockade cut off food and fuel shipments from farm towns, and around 4.5 million were affected. Food stocks in the cities in the western Netherlands quickly ran out. Adult rations in cities such as Amsterdam dropped below 1,000 calories a day by the end of November 1944, and to around 580 daily calories by the end of February 1945. Over the winter, a number of different factors caused starvation. Winter itself was very harsh that year with regards to the weather, which delayed transport by boat, and also the German army had destroyed many docks and bridges in the Netherlands, preventing the Allied advancements, but also restricting supplies reaching starving people. Allied bombing also made it difficult to transport food, as people didn't realise the difference between German military shipments and civilian shipments. The supplies of vegetable fats dwindled, cheese and meat would become in short supply, the bread ration halved in its grams per week. The bread ration went from 2,200 grams a week to around 400 grams a week. Even the black market ran out of food, with gas and electricity turned off as well. People were freezing and starving. Houses and furniture was being dismantled to provide fuel for heating, and people were even eating tulip bulbs. By early 1945, the situation was growing extremely desperate for the millions of Dutch still living under German control. Prince Bernhard appealed to the Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower for help. However, Eisenhower didn't have the authority to negotiate a truce or a deal with the Germans. The Prince would go to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and US President Franklin D. Roosevelt for permission, and during this time Eisenhower then began to plan immediately for airdrops to be arranged. On the 23rd of April 1945, authorisation was given and Allied agents negotiated with Reich Commissar Arthur Seyss-Inquart and a group of German officers. It was agreed that the participating aircraft would drop humanitarian food supplies to affected Dutch areas, and that these aircraft would not be fired upon in the specific air corridors that they travelled in. Known as Operation Manna, which took its name from the Bible and specifically the Book of Exodus, the British operation began proceedings. Planned by the RAF, the first 2 Lancaster bomber aircraft were chosen for a test flight. With a crew of 7 men, one of the planes took off in bad weather, despite the fact the Germans hadn't agreed a ceasefire. It had to fly low over the German guns, but it was successful in dropping her cargo and returning to the airfield. Operation Manna then began fully. British aircraft would fly 145 sorties by Mosquitoes and 3,156 sorties by Lancaster bombers to successfully drop food onto the starving people of the Netherlands. The Lancaster bombers were used to dropping bombs from a height of 20,000 feet, however they now had to do their jobs at low altitude, some flying as low as 120 metres from the ground. The mosquitoes would sometimes mark their drop zones, and almost 7,000 tonnes of food would be dropped on different Dutch cities by Bomber Command. John Funnell, a navigator who took part in Operation Manna, would write, "As we arrived, people had gathered already and were waving flags. It was a marvellous sight. As time went on, there were also messages such as 'Thank you for coming, boys.' The aircraft would drop tinned goods, dried food, chocolate and other food, and the hope was that the people would redistribute the supplies within their communities. However, some were so desperate they couldn't resist eating it straight away, which led to some people getting sick, and some even dying as a result of refeeding syndrome. Many lives were saved, however, and it gave hope that the war would soon be over." On the other hand, the Americans would also carry out sorties delivering food to starving Dutch people. Operation Chowhound was where 10 bomb groups delivered over 4,000 tonnes of food. 400 B-17 Flying Fortresses would take part in these operations. 3 aircraft overall were lost in the missions, 2 in a collision and 1 in an engine fire. There were bullet holes found in several aircraft as they'd been fired on. However, the results of Operation Manna and Chowhound were extremely positive. So instead of dropping bombs on the Germans, the operations to drop food onto the starving people of the Netherlands were an overwhelming success that saved the lives of many thousands of people. It's an operation that should be remembered for its humanitarian purposes and the fact that the sorties were allowed to pass without harm befalling them from German anti-aircraft fire. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.